Welcome to Alternate Endings.
Half audiobook.
Half podcast.
Full apocalypse.
This time, we discuss a short story from our last episode and walk through the real-world implications of this kind of apocalypse. Welcome, everyone, to another recap episode of Alternate Endings. This is Ivan speaking, and I am joined by
Jordan Zanardelli,
Tyler Chrisley,
and we are going to discuss Murmurations, the short story. And I will say, the first thing I wanted to bring to the both literal and physical table here today is one thing that gets, and no pun intended, pigeonholed about bird stories is that people will say, oh, this is a Hitchcock story. And in fact, a listener out there, his name is Derek, his punk ass said, I listened to your Hitchcock story. And I was like, no, this is not a Hitchcock story. One of the things I really wanted to get across was that these birds were not malicious. They were just all happening to flock to the same metro in an overwhelming abundance at a very specific same time. They were not out, they're not people killers, right? So the Alfred Hitchcock film Birds, they're like breaking in windows and they're trying to eat people, and it was like, it's this horrible stuff. And towards the end of the story, you can see that the birds' behavior might be changing a little bit, but it's only because they're getting desperate. They've spent a lot of time there, food sources are running out, and they're getting a little aggressive, but only towards people who've shown them aggression in the past.
They're getting smarter.
Right. And so it really was an intention of mine that I did not want these birds to just be like people eating, like zombie birds. No, they're normal birds, but they have all come here for some unexplained reason. And if anyone is tuning in this episode hoping that they're going to get an explanation for why they came to the DFW Metro, I don't have it for you. So you're going to leave disappointed.
Just use your imagination. It's whatever you want it to be.
Man-made thing or some natural pattern or something.
I mean, now that the human population as a whole is expanding and growing, I mean, they say by 2050 it's going to be like 9.8 billion people on the planet. There's only so much room, so we're taking over all this land and building it up, so where's the best place to go? I mean, there's whole documentaries about how animals now are making cities their habitat. Like they cohabitate with humans, and birds especially are like the number one on the list of making the best. Like honestly, they're thriving even more than it was all just trees. Because I mean, there's so many ledges and perches. You can't go into a city anywhere and not see birds.
And when I was looking up information about birds and have they been harmed more by human interference in more and more cities, roads, etc., civilization, or have they benefited? Some scientists seem to think that birds have benefited, that the human presence has actually made things evolutionarily and biologically better for birds and of different species. And one of the things that helps a certain bird species is the larger they are, the better they are at surviving with humans, of the studies that they've conducted.
I mean, which makes sense, not just for their own. We're more likely not to like kill them or hit them or not notice them, but kind of my first thought with that is just cats. That the household cat has killed, I know it seems so weird, but the household cat has killed so many bird species. Like there's certain smaller bird species that are on the verge of extinction purely because of the house cat.
Really?
Yeah. And so I would think a bigger bird is more likely to be safe from a cat than, it might not all be that, but I know for a fact, personally, I've seen neighbors' cats walk around with birds in their mouth all the time.
Yeah, I've had family cats kill multiple birds and drop them on the front porch.
Yeah.
We're like, thank you, actually, but appreciate it.
In a case where it's that many birds into a city, I mean, you see all the videos on Nature Channel of birds doing this beautiful swarms and like in and out, and it looks amazing. But can you imagine it to a point where it's a black wall that if you drive into, A, there's the impact, but B, you're not going to see anything. It's not like a fog.
it could almost block out the entire sun, cause a mini eclipse.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I definitely wanted that character's wife when I was considering how I wanted her to pass away. I did not want the birds to have killed her. Again, avoiding this trope of Hitchcock. I wanted it to be something that was an accident caused by bird interference, which is also why I wrote that the plane went down. She wasn't like attacked in her home and eaten alive. She was a victim of circumstance with too many birds being there.
Like any animal, it's all a matter of opportunity. So if there were to be a bird that was eating a human, and I didn't get the Hitchcock vibe of like they're trying to go out and kill people, except for maybe at the end when they're literally the very end when they're sitting on the telephone poles and on the gas station and kind of start grouping up more and more. That's when you're like, okay, they're a little creepy. And like you said, they're starting to get smarter, like maybe.
Scouting out what's available.
Yeah.
The whole rest of the time, it's just a matter of I see a space, I'm going to fill it. When birds break into her neighbor's house and he's got to beat him off with a stick. Right? It's just a matter of there's not many other places to go and he left his window open.
And they come back, right? And they're like accosting him outside of his house. I also put that in there because when I was looking up things about, I wanted to see just how intelligent we thought that crows and ravens are. And there are a series of studies that showed that ravens in particular are immaculate at remembering people's faces and using that information later. And they'll pass it on. So a whole flock of birds will begin to know that human is good, that human is bad, they're an asshole. And they'll remember that. And the group will act accordingly. And so those birds have come back. And what was that? Cora? Right? No. Yes.
The Legend of?
Yeah.
the main character, the female character.
Yeah.
Her neighbor. That's why I put that in there, because they remember him and they come back and they taunt him. Not because they're trying to eat him, but they're like, hey, you're a jerk.
Remember you, asshole.
Remember you from past life.
Birds don't just remember like faces and stuff. They've done things where they've trained. It's mostly like ravens and crows, like you're talking about, since they're so smart. They'll pick up cigarette butts and they'll go take it to a place and they'll like turn it into like a trash and it'll dispense a treat for them. Ravens and crows will go do that and they'll help pick up because they know.
Oh, they've trained them to do this.
They're smart enough that they know, hey, if I deposit this cigarette butt here, I'm going to get some sort of reward.
Yeah.
And on top of that, on the negative end, and I think it was in Japan, birds, crow nests particularly, were taking up all over. Like they were starting to be on railway lines and a bunch of different places like that they were just interfering. So humans destroyed them all. They took down all the nests. And so what the birds did in retaliation, they doubled the amount of nests. There was way too many nests.
I heard about this.
They recruited their friends.
Yeah, like more nests than birds. Like there's no need for that many. And it was almost just out of spite. So it's like even now, birds are smart enough to recognize like I will take advantage of an opportunity and I'm going to teach you this lesson. Don't fuck with us because we're just going to come back at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading stories similarly that they'll drop nuts on a busy street so that cars run over them and crack them. They'll pull human fishing lines out of the water and grab the fish and then put the lines back. And they'll also drop breadcrumbs that they pick up in the city into ponds and rivers so that fish will come up and eat the bread and then they grab the fish.
Oh, wow.
Like ravens and crows are up there.
They're highly intelligent. So something like this, I could see... Obviously it's probably going to be multiple types of birds, but in my head, I almost always picture like a raven or a crow just because A, they're so smart, and then B, you think of a big black wall of bird.
That you definitely don't want coming at you.
Exactly.
As a raven or crow. I mean, because I can think of a lot of movies and stories I've read when I was younger where that bird is like the symbol of either like a representation of somebody's soul that's like come back to haunt you or just represent death in some way. So it's definitely the bird you don't want coming at you.
Well, we all had to either listen to or read The Raven in high school, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And what was that story? The raven was coming and it was knocking, it was pecking on the window and it was...
Oh, it's been
Does anyone remember?
Long.
I can't. I mean, the only thing I can remember.
Our high school English teachers have failed us.
Failed all of us.
Well, I mean, we need a refresher.
That's right. Yeah.
But I don't remember anything about the film, so
You just kind of. I feel like of all the thing when you hear Poe, you automatically think of the Raven, and you think of that cover, and it's just an eerie raven, a crow, whatever bird it is on the cover, and it's just kind of you get that eerie sense. And like Jay-Z was talking about, in so many film and television, they're used as either like an ominous warning, like, oh, I see a crow there, something bad's about to happen, or it symbolizes a dark person. Someone shows up and crows come with them.
It's a commonly used idea. People will say how ravens are notorious for holding funerals for members of their own flock. Yeah, members of their own clan, essentially, who die. They'll hold a funeral. But biologists were looking into this closer, and they found that they're not holding a funeral necessarily, but they're doing crime investigation. The whole group will go together and look for clues at how that bird was taken out. And so they can find the predator, or they can understand why this bird died
So
this
they
way.
can avoid it.
So they can avoid it next time.
Dang, that's crazy. We talk about humans as the evolutionary apex and how we're the smartest, but then you hear stories about that where it's like, really all they can't do is speak. But they're...
Yeah.
Second place is not that far behind when you consider what octopi are capable of, birds, and then
dolphins.
Chimps. Yeah.
And
Everybody else is stepping up their game. They're adapting.
Yeah.
Did you just see this week that we injected, not we, some country, I don't think it was the United States, they injected a chimpanzee's brain with human DNA and they increased its intelligence.
I did not.
I just saw
not
this
know
like
that.
2 days
Whoa.
ago.
What?
That's off the beaten path. That's off the topic of this.
But that's still...
Second place may not be as far behind as many people would like to
Which
think.
is, it could be cool, but also a little bit scary to think about.
a little Planet of the Apes coming
That's exactly.
coming to the truth.
Yeah. Do y'all know why the story was called Murmurations?
I don't.
No.
So I could not, for the life of me, decide what to title the story until I looked up that a flock of birds that are so dense that it takes on a shape is called a murmuration, which is how one of the main characters lost his wife, was this group of birds coming across the road. And usually it's used as a term for starlings. Like they'll dive and they'll switch in the air and it looks like this molding kind of fluid geometric pattern in the sky.
Beautiful.
And that's a murmuration.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I feel like that's a good way of putting it because it's A, accurate to it, but B, at least in my heart, speaking of, when I think about it, when I think of a murmuration, I think of like a heart pounding or beating. And
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
If
You're
you're
a little
driving,
scared.
you're driving into a wall of birds and all of like your heart's beating.
Yeah.
And then just for what you think about it, how stupid do you have to be as a person who know there's a bunch of birds driving in, like not the people driving because they slow down, not the main characters, but the truck driver, just to keep plowing through. Like, oh, it's just a bunch of fucking birds. I'm
going to plow through this.
Just the murmur. Totally envision that for me on top of the shape. So that was my first thought as to why, but I didn't want to go so far stretched. But I think that's cool, whether you meant to or not. A little double meaning.
Well, this person who just drove their truck into this flock, think about their mind of how serious are they taking this problem if they still live there? Which reminded me, I wanted to ask you all, do you think that you all would be in this similar state? Do you think that you would have stayed behind if you heard these warnings? You're like, so what? A bunch of birds. I mean, do you think you'd be one of the last people to leave? Or
I would have been gone for sure because I'm always like a little self-conscious about a bird possibly flying over top of me and pooping on me. So I always like double check, Like if I walk over any power lines or anything, any overhanging like ledges. So I'd be out of there.
So why'd you decide to leave Dallas-Fort Worth eventually? I lost my wife. You? I lost my sister. You? I didn't want to get pooped on.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
I mean,
it's not my thing.
I don't know because for me, it sounded like it shut everything down. How does a city like that run?
Yeah, you have to travel underground almost.
Yeah, like
unless
how
you're
are
driving
you?
a big semi.
Yeah. How are you making money and sustaining yourself? Are you just going to go and loot everything because everyone's gone? Or is there some slim population that somehow keeps it running? I feel like that would be the only thing that would be hard. I wouldn't mind all the birds until obviously you see something like that happen where your wife gets killed because of it. And then that's your trigger of, oh, well, crap, I made the wrong choice. But I think I would have probably been on the same line of, that's just a bunch of birds.
Yeah.
Like,
they're not a threat.
By themselves.
Well,
yeah.
that and like you said, this wasn't a Hitchcock thing where they were aggressive and carnivorous right off the bat. So it just been like, wow, there's a lot of extra birds here. I wonder why. but they're not going to affect our daily lives, except for now in the travel sense when more and more of them are coming. And then now they're don't have any food, and now they're becoming more aggressive, like you pointed out at the end.
Yeah, I tried to put that perspective cap on of what it would be like to see your neighbors leave this impending threat of birds and what that would be like. And then a couple months later, you find yourself that half of your neighbors have gone and now you're still there. And that kind of unraveling of the community and the neighborhood that you've always lived in, it just seems like that would be so frustrating and haunting at the same time.
And what would the rate of birds need to be for it to reach this? I don't remember if you directly touch on it, but is this something that one day there's, oh, I notice 100 extra birds at this park bench. Like, that's weird. There's a bunch of them. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, they've like multiplied by 100 and there's a bunch? Or is it like literally all these birds show up at once out of nowhere? Almost as if they're one intelligent
Like hive mind.
group. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yeah, is it
Did you
over
have
time? Does it grow over time? Or, yeah.
I didn't mention it specifically, but in my head when I was writing it, I kind of thought of a 6-month period where we went from normal and then 6 months later it was complete infestation, unable to live a normal life there.
Yeah. I feel like people wouldn't even point out until like halfway through
Exactly.
that. They're like, yo, there's double the amount of birds that there are usually in this town. Like, we got to do something about this. We got to talk about this.
Yeah. At what point does it actually start impeding life?
Yeah.
Like you said, is it that halfway point where all of a sudden the repair shop has 50 cracked windows to do at the same time because a bunch of birds and like, oh yeah, this is abnormal? Or is it even earlier that...
Yeah. I think it would be when the news just starts reporting about all these bird related accidents and they're like, everyone's just reporting about all these birds causing people issues like travel issues or flying in the windows or stealing food from them or something because they're getting smarter. That's probably when people would want to talk about the issue.
Right. And the people who stayed behind, you were talking about like, what would life maybe be like when most people were gone and it was still chaos? So there were just a few gas stations left, some grocery stores. I feel like one thing I thought about is like friends of ours who work from home. Like you could easily stay in this area if you wanted, if you just absolutely dug your nails in. And it makes me think, are you all familiar with the story of Pitcher, Oklahoma?
Yeah, a little bit.
Pitcher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's Picher. People can Google it if they want. I might have misspelled that, but hey, Google will autocorrect you if you want. If you're still out there and you're using Bing, please, you're on your own for that. And you're search engine, so go for what you want.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
I'm being indoctrinated every day. So, Pitcher, Oklahoma was a town that was mining something, and forgive me for not knowing what the actual product they wanted was. But there were these giant chat piles, like 6 stories tall. These were just leftover zinc deposits that were a byproduct of whatever they were mining. And it was this small rural town in northeastern Oklahoma. Well, eventually there started to become health problems in the town. They didn't know what was going on. And they realized after some investigation that these zinc piles were actually radioactive and that they were contaminating the water source and they were making people sick and they were giving kids cancer.
I think I've heard about this. I think I saw
I've been
it
there.
in the... Have you?
I have. Yeah. So the U.S. government told everybody, you have to leave. Or we suggest that you leave. And only like half the town left. Most of the people stayed behind. That's what I really thought about this story was like, even if half your neighbors were gone, some people get so much value and connection from where they live that they would dig their heels in, even if they knew, even if I had to be the last person on my entire street, I'm going to be here.
Yep.
So it wasn't until the government forced everyone. They foreclosed everyone's homes or they bought their homes out. And
So
that's
you have to move.
Yeah, they forced them. And so it was like 2 years after the federal forced exodus that I went and visited there. And it was insane. And
Ghost town feel?
Ghost town.
yeah, and it was either right before the federal mandate or right after it got hit by a tornado. And because nobody lived there anymore, they didn't fix the homes back up.
Yeah.
So it is not only a ghost town, but it's a completely obliterated town, and all the zinc piles are still there. And I have photos, and we like climbed on it a little bit, but hopefully we didn't have too much radiation. But it just... it was like a 3-hour drive from where I lived at the time to get there, and driving back, I just kind of wondered, like, what would cause a person to be so stubborn to stay behind when you you're putting yourself at risk and your children at risk just by being here.
Just ride or die for your community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some of those people, probably most of the ones that stayed behind, their families, like generations of families, had lived in Pitcher, Oklahoma their entire life.
Right.
And so it's like, no, this is all we know. Like that's scary going out in the real world. It's like leaving the vault in Fallout. You're just like, I don't want to go out in the real world. I'd rather stay here and potentially die.
It's all they know. It's their livelihood is there. I mean, I'm assuming they probably closed down the mines too. So if I remember correctly, that's like basically all that was there. It was all mining families, wasn't it?
Maybe
for the most part,
sure.
and like,
yeah.
Or you worked the shops,
Yeah,
or you
like
worked
a school teacher or nurse or something.
All the necessities in a community. But besides that, it was basically all mining towns. Even beyond that, just going into even more real world with oil. Like you hear about these places in South Dakota where people were building massive houses because there was jobs and they were making money just for it to dry up. I mean, even beyond being forced out, just for it to dry up. And then all of a sudden you've made this life here that you have to leave because there's nothing left. What happens if, I mean, the guy even talks about, oh, my boss left and all my coworkers weren't showing up. I mean, what happens at that point when you're going to a company that doesn't exist anymore because there's nothing left?
Right. Yeah, the guy's job, they closed down. They closed down that branch because supervisor left, everyone left, coworkers left, and there was no reason to have the office open anymore. So I don't even know what you would do at that point, right?
Yeah.
And you can really put yourself in that shoes where I think it's easy to imagine the phone call from your family that says, "What are you doing? Move, come out
get out of
here."
there.
When you know other places are free. That's also a big thing, is like, what would keep you in this town where there's a bunch of birds, which I don't know many people who want to live through inconvenience. They force it upon themselves. And then you hear about other places that they're like, hey, come to me. There aren't birds here.
Right. Well, we all have a family member, or we know someone with a family member who has like 10 parakeets, or they're just like
My
bird
dad.
people. They're bird people, right? No matter how loud it is, screeching, they want them. So I think there'd be some people, hey, if you're a bird watcher, imagine
Oh, yeah.
the fun
They're all
time you could
about it.
have in the brand new Dallas-Fort Worth. Dude, I'd be out there outside the city limits. I'd be charging. All right, we got the sponsored bird tour. Everyone get your binoculars, your sunscreen. You ready? You got like these protective face shields just in case like you get in a huge group. Who knows?
Oh, yeah, I bet like bird watchers and bird keepers would probably be moving out there. I bet bird keeping shops and bird watching shops, they'd probably have like Under Armour would have like some sponsored gear for them and stuff. They'd probably be selling so well out there.
It makes me think like when overpopulation of deer or something like pheasant or squirrel gets in an area, they give a ton of hunting tags.
Oh yeah,
You know, they basically be begging people to come out here with guns. And people will be
fix it.
driving like, what are you doing this weekend? Like, oh, I'm going down to DFW for some bird hunting
Yeah.
for the weekend. Just out there blowing birds away.
and especially with and how big some of those walls would be with those flocks. I bet they'd be like, so maybe
You wouldn't even have to
it's just
aim.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
didn't have to aim. You just be like, all right, like anybody could go hunting. Oh, you're gonna hit something. Like you could just aim and pray and spray.
Right. And one thing that I mentioned real subtly in the background is that this was a nationwide phenomenon at first. So birds had gotten too successful alongside humans, essentially. And then they all, for some reason, left other places to go to Dallas-Fort Worth. And I think one thing that's interesting to consider is that one city's problem is often another city's benefit. So, like, people who lived in surrounding areas, Houston, Austin, Denver, they're going to become slightly better places to live because most of the birds have gone and went to Dallas-Fort Worth.
Well, maybe, but to think about also what birds eat. So
Humans.
yes, if we're living in a Hitchcock.
Yeah. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Wrong story.
Which, according to Derek, we are.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there.
But I mean, birds eat a lot of insects, so there'd be a lot of critters. And I'm not a fan of critters either. So
You just made me think, like, what predators of birds would come in and just have a feast day in this new metro?
Other birds.
Larger
I mean,
birds.
Exactly.
Like hawks and
Oh,
eagles.
yeah.
and
It would
like
be-
mountain lions and stuff,
It would be chaos. Not
Yeah.
only would there be so many birds, but
vultures.
yeah, anything that would prey on them or pick on them after they're dead is
They're
going
going
to
to find
show
a way
up.
there. Yeah.
I think it would like turn into, if this problem persisted long enough, it would just be this entire urban sprawl of extreme biodiversity, I think, after like 10 years. Because
it's already an urban jungle. Why not make it a little more literal with the variety of life that comes to benefit off of it?
And I wonder eventually if they would get desperate enough where it'd be too dangerous to be there. Like if they would, in a Hitchcock style, turn on people because they're too desperate and they see someone, and I don't even know. I feel like maybe birds would turn on other birds before they're going to try to attack a human, especially if we're talking crows.
And the smaller ones like crows and ravens. Maybe a vulture or definitely an ostrich.
Yeah, I'm not. Oh, I can't even imagine.
I would, if ostriches were running around Dallas Fort Worth, I'd be getting out of there immediately. That'd be so scary.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah, just aggressive, angry ostriches just roaming the streets.
Okay, first ignorant question of the day: where do ostriches naturally live?
Australia, New Zealand.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was sitting here thinking I have no idea where they even naturally
either.
populate.
Yeah.
Because
that's
I would have guessed Africa.
I mean, you can also
like
think
northern Africa in the savannah. I feel like that's not correct.
I feel like you are correct. I'm wrong. I'm thinking of emus.
Oh, okay.
Oh, emus, yeah.
I apologize for all you listeners out there. Emus.
They're shaking their head. No, they didn't know.
Also, if I'm incorrect, I apologize as well.
No.
We're not apologizing for
you
anything.
You can look it up on Google, and if you're using Bing, then I'm sorry. I can't help you.
We're just talking about the story here and ruminating about possible apocalypses. We have never confirmed nor denied being professional biologists or anthropologists or any applicable research.
Yeah, and I failed zoology in college, so you definitely can't trust me.
Yes. To imagine what it'd be like if one ostrich got into Dallas-Fort Worth and was running amok, and then there were 10, and then there were hundreds. I mean, hell, I'll be honest. If I knew that there were 100 ostriches running loose in my city, I would be, at some level, terrified to leave my house.
Oh,
and
yeah.
make it 1,000. That would be an equally scary possible future story for alternate endings.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and they're just as big as you are. I mean, unless you're like an NBA player.
Yeah, I mean, if not bigger.
Yeah.
Plus, those talons, they will straight up gut you.
Yeah.
Wait, do ostriches have talons?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
That's why they're so
I thought
dangerous.
they were flat-footed.
No.
No.
Oh, look up those talons. They're huge.
They got some claws on. The claws.
I'm probably having an ostrich nightmare tonight. It's going to be a very strange 8 hours of sleep.
8-hour ostrich dream. Wow.
So, as we wrap up this recap discussion for Murmurations, the story, any final thoughts you'd like to pop off the noggin?
Honestly, just talking about it more made me think of different possibilities that they could be experiencing with those birds, and not just. I feel like at least with Tyler and I, when we came into this, we both imagined ravens or crows, and that was it. But then we just talked about ostriches and vultures.
And finches
and hawks
and sparrows.
and what that would do to an ecosystem with having all those birds there possibly fighting each other. A little bird civil war.
Imagine if songbirds had flocked there too, how loud it would be if they're all
be
chirping and singing.
I mean, I feel like most birds they communicate some sort of way. It would be deafening. But I mean, one thing I was thinking of throughout, and it ties back to my dad, who, just as a little background, at one point we had 10 to 12 chickens, and now he has a African gray and
Which is a parrot?
Yes, and a beautiful rainbow macaw.
Ooh,
So
nice.
they're both beautiful birds. But so with the chickens, we had some, I think it was sparrows or another of that type of smaller bird infested their nest and got them all sick. So I can only imagine the amount of disease that would spread, even thinking about that bird flu. Exactly.
I didn't even think about this as part of the story.
At one point, on top of the feces, like just the pure sickness that would
unsanitary to live there.
Completely unsanitary. It would make it so difficult. So
that bird poo doesn't come out easily.
No,
especially in cars.
Or your hair, as you so aptly mentioned earlier.
Yes, I really care about my hair. I don't want bird poop in my hair. My biggest fear One of my biggest fears is getting pooped on right before I have to go to work. And then you're like, I can't change, and I gotta deal with this poop on my shirt for the rest of the day. And everyone's gonna ask you about it. You're gonna have to deal with that. Yeah, fucking bird pooped on me. End of discussion. Move on, please.
There it is. And I hadn't even considered sickness, getting a disease. People would go to the hospital a lot with, and who knows if some brand new type of bird flu or sickness would come out of an area of an overabundance, all these birds in one place, competing,
have to.
fighting each other. There'd be dead birds all over the place just by proxy of the too many birds being in there. So.
Well, and then, yeah, and same with starvation.
Okay, well, thank you both. This was awesome. And
Thank you.
We'll talk to you all soon.
Sounds good.
And remember, death comes for us all.
Thank you all for listening. Next episode, we return with a brand new audiobook story. Talk to you soon. Assuming the world is still standing by then.
We would like to thank Kevin MacLeod for his music found on Incompetech.com.